With me is a panel of experts in this area. We have Kristen Howe, Luke Harris, Evan Halperin, and Joanna Cellini. We will be addressing any questions you guys may have after viewing this video via our Twitter handle, which is @GovWinPubSafety, or you can find us on LinkedIn. And you can also submit questions to us that we will address to you individually through our email, which is statelocalresearch@deltec.com. And with that, we'll start off the panel here. And my first question to all of you really is, we've heard a lot in this market about doing more with less. It's a term that a lot of agencies are utilizing to explain why they can or cannot do anything. So I guess from a personnel standpoint, what does doing more with less really mean in this market?
Even though public safety has remained and will continue to be a top priority politically, budgets are still tight. Even though public employment and expenditures have continued to rise over the past 20 years, their large budgets represent an area where IT innovations and technologies can really act as a way to achieve cost savings.
Okay. And what about in some of the areas that relate to crime prevention? Are that of surveillance, drones, red light cameras, and that type of stuff? I guess in terms of surveillance, Kristen, I mean, what does doing more with less really mean?
Well, I mean, in terms of surveillance, I think a lot of cities and counties are using surveillance almost as a replacement for officers, just because a lot of the times it's cheaper to buy a surveillance system or to install a red light camera than it is to hire an officer, train an officer, and particularly, pay pensions and things on the officer. So a lot of places are implementing, entire surveillance systems, or they're using businesses that already have surveillance systems in place, and they're kind of hooking into the corporate and private security systems and using those to augment their current system. And then red light cameras are also used oftentimes not only as a way of making money for the city, just by catching people who are going through red lights and issuing tickets off of that. So they're really using surveillance not only to augment but also to increase revenue for them.
Okay. And I know that there's a lot of talk too about what we'll term as predictive policing. The ability to use analytics to determine where crime hotspots are. Is the doing more with less comment really the driving force behind predictive policing?
Oh, absolutely. Predictive policing is a very attractive solution to law enforcement agencies as a way to increase efficiency while saving resources. What predictive policing does is it captures information in real time and then uses that analytical software to determine which areas are more susceptible to criminal activity, so departments can really, determine where to allocate officers. Personnel costs are really expensive for agencies, but predictive policing is not really meant to just replace, traditional boots on the ground technology. It really is just trying to help departments determine, have a more targeted approach to fighting crime.
Okay. And I know that we've heard a lot of that coming from the federal level, from DOJ specifically. I mean, are we hearing that with the grant programs that offer us a project that is doing more with less? Is that kind of the driving force?
I think absolutely. I think there are certain grant programs that are targeted to using money that would maybe not go as far with a cop on the street because of the reasons you mentioned, as the pension and all the other aspects to it. So there's different grants that basically, specifically the Burn Criminal Justice Innovation Grant and Program basically is providing funding specifically to innovative ways to reduce crime and use technology as the driving force of that type of solution.
Is this an issue that's also in DHS as well?
The Department of Homeland Security more is focused on a lot of disaster relief and more things on a higher level, obviously helping local governments as well. But the Department of Justice and the Bureau of Justice Assistance are really the primary agencies that are providing those funding. So if agencies are looking for that money and vendors want to follow where the money is coming from, that's where they want to start.
Okay, great. And so I guess as a vendor, I want to know what this market looks like. Is there opportunities for me? So in terms of the landscape of this market, what does it look like? I guess in terms of personnel, are there really less officers today than there were yesterday?
No. You see, over the past 20 years, personnel has risen about 61%, with about 200% of that coming at the federal level. 40% at the state level and 50% at the local level. And it's important to note that still 76% of all personnel reside at the local level.
Okay. And so I guess at the local levels, we're probably seeing a lot of those red light cameras and surveillance technologies. So I guess what does that landscape look like for the local market?
Yeah, I mean, on the local market, as well as the state market, though you're right, it does tend to be focused locally. California recently, they introduced a bill to try and limit the number of red light cameras that can be used, and the governor vetoed it and sent it back and said, this is a local issue, I'm not getting involved. And it certainly is growing, though. It is growing on like a city and a county level. Over the past 3 years, every year there have been over 400 procurements for either surveillance systems or CCTV systems or even just red light cameras. So it's certainly a growing market, and I expect with the increasing popularity of drones and the ability to use them outside of border areas in the next few years, that's going to be a really big area.
Okay. And I mean, is predictive policing changing as much? Is that landscape growing?
Predictive policing is not typically a publicly procured technology. Really, agencies require that on-site visit from vendors to come in and really analyze what the current infrastructure looks like and then build out a solution from within. But, because, the overall cost is relatively low for an agency and the benefit is extremely high, I do believe this market is really going to continue to grow over the next few years, especially since it can really integrate with other data sources that are being used.
Okay. I mean, is there any other, efforts from DOJ in terms of grants to help push this market forward?
In general, in 2012, there was over, I believe, $800 million specifically for crime prevention type projects. And in next fiscal year, with the budgets possibly being reduced due to sequestration, it's possible that some of those grants could be cut in 2013. But with both police, there's a COPS grant, which is specifically to hire cops, innovation for crime prevention, whether it's surveillance or predictive policing. But it all will kind of depend on what will be approved for the fiscal year 2013 budget. There's about $1.8 billion being requested from the DOJ, which was down from the $2 billion last year. So should that be available, there's lots of opportunities for agencies, small and large, to be able to fund their projects. So just kind of have to find innovative ways to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that message resonates across all of government, that there's just really there's less money. The pool of money for agencies to use to implement these technologies is continually shrinking, and I assume that that's going to continue over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back to 2010 through this past fiscal year 2012, the grants have gone down in almost every area: Homeland Security, Department of Justice, kind of the whole way. And some of the requirements for the fiscal year 2013 budgets are going to be a little bit less strict to allow both small agencies, populations of 50,000, and a large agency like New York City being able to compete for the same funding. Obviously, there's higher crime in New York City than there is in a smaller town, but they may need the funding just as much to prevent incidents in their own town.
Right. So I mean, there's competition for federal funds. There's competition for state and local funds, just in terms of general budget dollars. As a vendor, what do I need to know? How can I gain a competitive edge over my competition when the funds available to agencies is dwindling?
I mean, I think at least in terms of surveillance, that's a really important point, especially since surveillance tends to be a very controversial technology. It's really important for vendors to take a proactive approach and kind of, work with agencies and kind of push their products towards agencies, and really the first, 2 or 3 systems that they employ, theoretically without incident, are really going to be test cases for them later on in the future. So it's really important that they get those first few procurements right. I mean, just particularly with the issues surrounding, the security. If you're taking surveillance footage, if you're putting it into a database, how secure is that database? Does it comply with all of the regulations that are laid out? And so proving that, their databases are secure and that the information is only being used in the way that it's, theoretically meant to be used is going to be really important.
Right. I mean, I assume that test case scenario expands all of crime prevention type technologies. I mean, I assume predictive policing is kind of the poster child for that.
Oh yeah, I mean, what vendors really need to know about predictive policing is they really need to sell agencies on a complete solution. And a complete solution would be intelligence gathering. It would also have crime analytics and hotspot identification. Also, really important for vendors is, as I said before, they really need to understand the current infrastructure of the department that they're selling to, because this technology is typically a custom-built solution, so the departments really require that on-site visit to really analyze current software and then build up a solution that can really be integrated within. Departments are really shying away from that traditional just data mapping and are looking for a more enhanced or predictive solution. So I think it's important to really sell on the point of, having a more proactive approach to crime fighting as opposed to reactive approach.
So I guess the follow-up question to that would be, in terms of return on investment, what are those things that agencies are looking for to determine the success of predictive policing?
The solutions that have been implemented have been generally successful, but because there hasn't been that much data publicly available, because it's a relatively new solution, I think it's hard to determine specifically what the success rate will be in the long term. But of the solutions that have been implemented, for example, Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department in North Carolina, their solution was implemented within the last decade, and they received about a 529% return, which is pretty significant. Also, similarly, Memphis, Tennessee, their police department received 863% return, which is also considerably high. So I really think, given that information, I think the success rates will continue to become more prevalent.
So with budgets dwindling, the pool of money being a lot smaller, having to show success stories like we've heard in Memphis and across the country, is that something that the federal grants are looking for too, is success stories before they award grant dollars?
I mean, yes and no. I think one thing that is common, sort of maybe a joke, but to say that no one's ever been fired for hiring too many police officers is kind of one of those things that if you're going to hire more people on the street, it's kind of what the citizens want. They see more people out there, they feel more safe. Obviously, with more innovative technologies, you kind of have to show, like in those cases in North Carolina, you have to show what return you can have on those technologies. So if you can show these government agencies when applying for grants, if you can show past successes where you maybe want to expand your solution, or you want to mimic another state's sort of crime prevention, you need to use those statistics and kind of decide whether you want to go to the approach of hiring more people or using more of a technology approach or some kind of cross between the two, because with these new technologies, you're going to need someone to be able to analyze that data. It just doesn't come in. Someone has to sift through the data. So it's kind of going to have to be a partnership between personnel and these technologies. So
I guess then that begs the question, from a grants perspective, which came first, the grant dollars or the examples of effectiveness? How do agencies apply for a grant that they have no past examples of it working, or maybe they haven't even started implementing it? How do you win dollars then?
I think in those cases you have to have people within your locality that are kind of forward-thinking and can go and maybe talk to a neighboring county or another city and say, or even go to a lot of these technology conferences where they can see a presentation from a certain locality talking about the successes and maybe do research and be able to see how they could apply that to their own location. And so, I mean, it's very difficult because an agency that maybe already has a plan and ways to do it are going to be maybe favored for getting those grant funding, while another that kind of doesn't really know where they're headed might have more difficulty. So I think it's kind of a balance whether you can be innovative enough to think of ways to obtain that money and use it for your advantage.
Okay. So do you guys have any final comments on what vendors should do? I mean, let's start out, I guess, in terms of surveillance and red light cameras. What do vendors need to do to win business in this area?
Well, I think with surveillance, because it is such a broad area, it does cover drones, it covers CCTV. At least with red light cameras, cities and counties are generally forced to make a decision about whether they're going to implement the cameras at an intersection with a lot of accidents or whether they're going to use it more as a revenue generating tool and kind of put the cameras at an intersection where maybe it has a lot of accidents, maybe it doesn't, maybe it just has a lot of people that run red lights and therefore they can just issue a lot of tickets. So I think if cities, if vendors are looking to kind of capitalize on that, they should target cities, which a lot of them have freely admitted that they're using red light cameras as the revenue generating tools. They should target those, because as cities make more money off the cameras, they're more willing to expand their camera network and put, more cameras into other intersections, which is a great opportunity for vendors.
Okay. So how about in terms of personnel? I mean, what are the selling points there?
Personnel, you see the states that have larger personnel numbers and also population, they see their IT spending is drastically larger than states with lower populations. So states like Texas and California and Florida, other high population areas are usually places with good IT budgets.
Okay. And in terms of predictive policing, I know you mentioned a few of the things, but is there anything else you want to add that vendors should start doing today?
I think vendors, should really, as we said before, look at success stories that have been implemented, or if there are various pilot projects being taken, and kind of look at what numbers have been derived from that and really use that as a selling point. At the same time, they should really try to understand what types of technologies are integrated with a predictive solution, because being able to understand that, they can kind of, sell their product on that point, and really just understand what the infrastructure is that they're looking at and what they're trying to build from.
Okay. And how do they win the federal dollars?
Well, kind of looking, I guess, briefly on the last year, fiscal year 2012, the states that had received the most funding, North Carolina was the #1 recipient of Department of Justice grants, followed by the kind of the usual suspects, California, Virginia, Texas, and obviously you think North Carolina, you might not expect them to be one of the top grant recipients. So I think it's going to be going forward is states that you would typically expect to receive the most based on their populations or their location to a border. I think those other smaller states are going to start to see more funds as they might be a little bit behind in some of these new technologies and maybe not using as much. They have some pilot projects around, but so I think those states and those vendors looking to do business in those states should continue focusing on some of the medium-sized to small-sized localities where they're maybe struggling in some ways and kind of need guidance on kind of what maybe would fit their size locality, size city. I think also looking into the next fiscal year, we're going to have to see whether the sequestration ends up moving forward in January as it's kind of proposed now. And if that's the case, it's going to be even more tough times for agencies. And then if $1 billion is cut out of some of these grant programs, it's going to be interesting to see how they move forward then.
Okay, great. Well, thank you guys, and thank you for listening. As you can see here, Crime Prevention Month spans a wide variety of technologies, a wide variety of issues ranging from personnel to grants to the technology itself, and the technologies along with the personnel and budget all put together create what we call as crime prevention. So with that, I'll thank you guys for listening and taking the time to watch us talk about these topics. For Kristen, Luke, Evan, Joanna, and myself, Jeff, we appreciate your time. Thank you.